And thank you, the organizers, for this wonderful conference. It's been great. We're a little bit tired right now, but I think we've learned a lot in my case. And I'm glad to have you here to share some ideas that are very exploratory in my case, because I'm starting a project on ecological justice, and I'm trying to explore some ideas related to agency in order to face these discussions on ecological justice. That's why I'm going to talk about ecological agency, and as the title says, I'm going to think in terms of animality. My central concerns is the relationship between animals in this presentation, but we can talk about other things, obviously, during the discussion. Well, to begin with, I would like to say some things related to the idea of agency and our common enemy probably in this debate, the modern idea of autonomy, the liberal autonomy, and so on. But regarding agency, I think we can think in agents and in the concept of agency as unifying things and as unities, in the sense that when we identify this distinction between happenings and deeds, for example, a classical way of introduce the idea of agency, right? We are unifying things such as mental states, desires, beliefs, intentions, and so on, right? Changes in the world, and also behavior, right? And we think in agential terms, we start to mix these things and to generate kinds of unifications of this, right? That's why we discuss, for example, the unity of actions and so on. But on the other hand, agents are unities. We predicate agential terms, we predicate verbs, abilities, and so on of individuals who are seen as unities, animals, for example, organisms, and so on. Not part of them. I think we can discuss this, obviously, as well, but I think that's something that we have in common in different perspectives on agency. And given that the discussion of the Congress is related to redefining some things, as I said, we have this common enemy, if you want. Is this common ideal, or the idea of an agency, an autonomy-centered view on agency, which understands agents as self-contained individuals, self-made individuals. Individuals are by definition separate from others, and when they interact with others, is as autonomous beings that, for example, are capable of make agreements with others. The model of social contract based on this. The model of contract law usually is based on this, right? The idea of autonomous agents and so on. And as we know, this model is powerful, but at the same time had some problems. If, for example, one problem, if we want to use it as a description of how agents act, human agents, for example, is false almost the whole time, right? Because the part of our life that we act in the way the description shows how we act is just the less part of our life. We usually act, we have instinct reaction or non-reflective reaction. We execute our actions without thinking in all the consequences, and so on, right? We are usually, for example, the influence of others, it's very important for how we act and how we see ourselves and so on. But if we say this is not a descriptive picture, it's just a normative idea, right? It has some problems as well, right? Because we are excluding babies, for example, some people with disabilities, some elder people, animals, and so on. We know this, we have this problem. And in that sense, there's a lot of elements of our life that we can call them agential, that is outside the picture when we talk in terms of normative, as a normative picture of who we are or how we should understand agency. So the idea of an ecological view on agency is precisely to change, in some sense, without renounce to the first ideas of agency, to change a little bit the way we see us as agents. We see agents in general in order to explain more things and probably to have good normative consequences. So yeah, the basic idea is in the first paragraph, and the idea is to, when we think in agents in ecological terms, we consider the relationship of the individual to her social and natural environment as constitutive of the agency. This is the point, right? The point is the constitution of agency is ecological in the sense that the abilities of the agent, the behavior of the agent, and so on, is shaped by the environment, okay? But at the same time, I think what is interesting is that, and probably very obvious, but it's interesting, is that given that agents are these unities that change the world, that make changes in the environment and so on, agents creates the environment. So we have this kind of interdependence between the environment and agents. Okay, that's a basic idea of the ecological idea of agency I'm working with. So, in that sense, the next step is, given that we are agents in a world with other agents, we make the world of others, the others make our world, and we share a common world where our agency is configured by others and we configure the environment, right? So that this is the basic idea of ecology, which is a part of the project. And I put these 3 pictures to show some ideas we can, I think, develop from this basic idea model. The first is, for example, we can, I think, plausibly describe what the agents are doing with the same verb. For example, we can say they are building, right? And in some sense, they are using, for example, they are using similar aspects of the environment in order to build, right? They are using sticks, goods, parts of trees, right? And what they are built has some kinds of common functionalities, right? They function to shelter, to care. Well, you know, we have different things. So, in some sense, what the beaver does with her lodge, the bird with the nest, the human with the house, and so on, have some very strong similarities and very complex ways of acting, of interacting with the world, that can help us to see some common issues in way how agents interact. Right? I'm not talking about autonomy here. I don't need autonomy to say this, right? I think we can discuss this later on. So in that sense, different agents here are part of bearers of different life forms, different ways of interacting with the environment. But these different life forms help the different animals to do similar things in their own way. Okay? For example, if they use different parts of their bodies, right, to do with that. They use different ways of architecture, if you want, and so on, right? And on the other hand, for example, if we think of escaping, probably she will fly, she will run with 4 legs, right, and they with 2 legs, right? And that is because they are part of different life forms, but they, in some sense, can do similar things. So, in that sense, I think that agents can be, I put it in the first slide, also links in the sense, meaning that agents are bearers of life forms, they actualize life forms, and at the same time they link these life forms with the environment, creating ecosystems, but they are also links between the mental and the behavior. So an ecological beyond agency tries to remark this as well. So if we accept this, I think we have some consequences. First this. Okay, I think the point of this slide is in this conference we have saw a lot of arguments our empirical evidence to say that we have studies and we have points of view and philosophical arguments to say we can support these ideas. Okay, that's the so I think here we can operate in a two-lane road. On the one hand, see how ecological is our human life form, and obviously in the case of humans, but also in the case of other species, socialization is incredibly important, right? And for example, we can see in the case of human agents how physical skills are mediated by social tasks, when we, for example, discuss social views on disability, right? It's exactly they are showing how some basic motor and cognitive skills change the way can be exercised, right, when we change the social environment, for example, but also the natural environment. But in the case of humans, obviously, the conceptual aspect of our world is incredibly important. The symbolic aspect, for example, the way we name actions, the way we define, or we can disagree about how to interpret some behavior as an action is very important. So, and then we can go further and say, well, when you interpret your actions in some way, mediated by the social environment, you see yourself as a kind of agent with some kinds of commitments, and we build ourselves in that way, right? So there is almost no part of agency, as we studied it, that is not ecological in that way, in the social way at least, right? And at the same time, our cultures are defined by the historical relationship with other species, also by historical structures built where oppression operates, for example, resistance as well, right? And everything this makes sense in this ecological environment. On the other hand, we can go through the animal way, right, the non-human animal way, and see how different studies have shown that it's plausible to attribute them different kinds of mental states and different kinds of agential capacity. Sometimes, if we interact with animals, it's pretty obvious, but now we have these empirical studies that, in some sense, are supporting this idea, right? Non-human animals in different species has their own goals. They can develop cooperative behavior, and that is related to, for example, have some kinds of mind reading, to be capable of attune their actions with others, and so on, right? To refrain for acting in some cases, and so on. Then we have caring behavior, right, in different species, and so on. Normative, I put also normative and cultural elements related to, for example, the possibility to identify some kinds of punishment in some specific species, and so on. My point is, well, we can identify very complex ways of agential behavior and agential abilities and capacities within different species, okay? And now I'm going to show you some consequences about this. First, well, autonomy, I don't want to reject autonomy, but we know we can build it from a relational view, right? And we can see it as an ideal, and we can see this is probably part of our life, but it's not the whole story. That's at least the first one. And then, this is, I think, we can do with an ecological view of agency, we can see that how different agential abilities and ways of behavior are distributed in different species, right, as building. I like to call this a distributed view in the sense that different abilities are distributed in different individuals of the same species, but also between different species. Right? And this implies, for example, that what I said, agents can build and are part of social communities, environments, and so on. Right? And I also said that here there's a strong component of interdependence between members of the same species, but also between interspecies in relationships. So the last argument I would like to present is the idea of a logical space of animality. Here again, I'm going to use the picture. Here we have something that we can identify, I think, easily as a case of hunting, right, where you have this relationship between a prey and a predator. What is interesting for me is that in order to be a prey, in some sense, it's important to have the ability to identify predators, right? It's important to the ability to know how the way of hunting is expressed in their behavior, and to predict in some sense what is he or she is going to do. The same we can say about the hunter, right? Why this is important? Because if, for example, rabbits don't count with these kind of abilities and capacities of reading others, right, the behavior of others in terms of mental states, for example, what we have here is the disappearance of rabbits in a short term, right? In order to survive as a species, the species needs these agential capacities. But at the same time, we, as we saw, we also can have cooperative behavior with other species, right? Caring behavior with other species, not everything is hunting. And for doing that, we need the same elements to be able to read minds in the behavior of others, and to be a competent agent in the animal world, in some sense, implies the possibility to do this, and it's needed for the agents to have these abilities. Okay. So in that sense, I think, right, we can defend this. I know this is probably a strong statement. The idea of mind is a mixture of both things: attributing, expressing, right, within a context, especially here in an ecological context. So to finish, for example, I think this very basic idea allows us to do tons of things, such as, for example, herd, right? Cats can domesticate us because of that, right? Julio Cortázar is being domesticated by cats. They are fishing, for example. There's a common fishing between dolphins and humans, and then they share what they fish. And there's interspecies relations of caring, right? Such as that. It's easy to imagine different ways this operates. Okay. So that is what I would like to present to you. Thank you very much. I open for discussions.